Chapter. My name is MUHAMAD ISMAIL and I'm from class 2 BMMH.
Assalamualaikum. My name is AZIMAH binti AZMAN with matrix number B09201216. I am from class of BMMH S1.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nama saya Muhammad AIMIZARITH BMMH dari kelas 2 BMMH section 1.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is FATINI. My matrix number is B09201017.
Objective: to show how heat conducts linearly along a solid bar and around a solid disk of uniform dimension and material. To show how to calculate experimental thermal conductivity of the material in a solid disk uniform dimension. Introduction. Conduction, the process by which heat is directly transmitted through the material of a substance when there is a difference of temperature between adjoining regions without movement of the material. The radial heat conduction apparatus is designed for students to study the principle of conduction heat transfer. The student is able to determine the relationship between the rate of heat transfer and temperature gradient, the cross-sectional area and length of the conducting part. This experiment unit shows how heat conducts radially outward from a central heat source through a metal disk dimension. So this is the equipment that we use when we do the experiment, which is the VDAS hardware and software, and the radial heat conduction experiment.
For the procedure, firstly we need to measure the ambient temperature before starting the experiment using thermocouple. Make sure base unit and each heater switch was switched off. Then we put the radial heat conduction experiment onto the front of the base unit and lock the unit properly. Then we connect the thermocouple sockets, each socket to the base unit. Follow the correct number from T1 to T7, and then heater cables also connected to the base unit. And then heater cables also connected to the base unit. Then we connect the water supply pipes and make sure the connection is in the correct way, because later it will affect the experiment result. Then water supply was opened and allow water to pass through the experiment for several minutes while we checking for any leaks. After that, base unit was switched on. Before switch on the heater, we need to turn the heater control to the minimum. After make sure the heater control was in minimum state, then we turn on the heater. For the first data, we set the heater to 30 watt and wait the temperature to stabilize and record the data from T1 to T7. Then we repeat the test with 50 watt and 90 watt. Repeat the test at one or more heater powers greater than 30 watt. And then we switch off the heater and water supply after we finish the experiment.
So this is our result from our experiment. As you can see, the result is valid. For the power of 30 watt, the result we get from the thermocouple's temperature 1 until temperature 7 is decreasing. It is also same for the power of 40 watt, 50 watt and 70 watt. But at 70 watt, as you can see at temperature 7, we get 100 degrees Celsius. And for the power of 90 watt, temperature 1 until temperature 3 is decreasing. And for the temperature 4 until temperature 6, it's begin to increasing. And lastly, for the temperature 7, it starts to decreasing. This temperature 1 thermocouples has been placed 0.02 meter from the heater and increasing by 0.01 meter for the thermocouples for temperature 2 until temperature 7. So this is data analysis from our experiment, which is graph temperature versus radial distance for the power of 30 watt. So what we can see from here, the temperature is decreasing from temperature 1 until temperature 7. And this is our graph temperature versus radial distance for the power of 50 watt. As you can see, the temperature is also decreasing from temperature 1 until temperature 6. But at temperature 7, it is 0. It is because the result is error. And lastly, this is a graph temperature versus radial distance for the power of 90 watt. As we can see, from temperature 1 until temperature 3 is this decreasing, and it starts increasing from temperature 4 until temperature 6 and begin to decreasing at temperature 7.
So this is the theoretical value for T2, T3, T4, T5, T6 and T7. The value of T2 is 18.7 Celsius, T3 is 1.53 Celsius, T4 is negative 11.79 Celsius, T5 is negative 22.67 Celsius, T6 is negative 31.87 Celsius, and T7 is negative 39.78 Celsius. So this is the graph of temperature versus radial distance for power of 30 watt. The curve of orange line is for experimental value and the curve of grey line is for the theoretical value. So these are some errors that might affect the result between theoretical and experimental data. Firstly, its thermal energy may be lost to surrounding. Secondly, proper physical contact may not be achieved. Thirdly, its impurities in material may cause heat to flow non-uniformly. Fourth is color of material, type and shape of material may affect the radiation coefficient. At the end of this experiment, we have comprehended the knowledge about heat transfer by conduction during lab session. Also, we were able to calculate the experimental thermal conductivity of the material in a solid disuniform dimension. And then we were able to know the cause of errors between theoretical and experimental data. And then we were able to recognize thermal conductivity for metal. And lastly, we were able to know the basic law of heat transfer by conduction.